put off by how long this video is, don't worry, I try to jam-pack my videos with as much content and as much detail as I possibly can. Anything I feel I can comment on and that I feel you might be interested in, I pretty much put in the video. I try not to repeat myself and talk fairly fast. Stalingrad movie review, the Stalingrad movie from 1993. Not 2003, 2013, 1959, 1990, 2009, and I'm not using the alternate title for Enemy at the Gates. I'm also not reviewing The Place. Starting with plot. The movie follows a platoon of uniformed World War II German army soldiers. They're transferred to Russia, where they ultimately find themselves fighting in the Battle of Stalingrad. It was the bloodiest battle that the world ever saw, outside of the ultimate showdown of Ultimate Destiny. It was an awful situation to be in. Of course, when life gives you Coolio lemonade, you can just drink it. You don't even have to take the lemons and make them into lemonade because life already made it for you. You're welcome. Just so many snowflakes, all the snowflakes. You know, the dead, piercing, blinding, white, vast emptiness of snow and millions of camouflaged inauguration Trump supporters. I'm sorry, that's unfair. There's no way to quantify these things, which is why Trump and his press secretary are making the positive claim of how many there are and then whining when it's easily disproven. You know, usually when I say these, it's been days since it came up, since I'm going to record on Saturdays, but Trump just won't drop it, even a week later. To be fair, I too was disappointed that they didn't find the continent of Atlantis yet. And since I'm on the subject, apparently the State Department's entire senior administration team has resigned. It's possible that they were fired, if so, disregard the following. It's irresponsible for them to quit. Trump might not properly replace them. And, you know, some say that Trump couldn't have been into, you know, the prostitutes, you know, peeing on the bed because he's a germaphobe. Dirty boy, dirty, dirty, dirty. I rest my case. On plot. Now, the battalion was the actual historical that fought at Stalingrad. Now, the director is technically a cinematographer, but he has directed 12 other movies as well, and I haven't watched any of them. And I have not watched the other Stalingrad title movies except for Enemy at the Gates, which is, you know, in a few words, just typical Hollywood bunk. You know, if you're watching good war movies, you really don't need to be watching that one. Now, the movie is in German with some Russian, and I watch it with subtitles. And the director apparently had a German military consultant with him on set, so that's the way to go. Now, the movie is 2 hours and 12.5 minutes with credits and 2 hours and 8 minutes without. And there are a number of times throughout where you might think, I kept checking the time, because I was like, the movie's ending now, isn't it? And it's like, oh, I've only been watching for an hour. More than half of the movie is left, and just, yeah, that happens a bunch. And this is not my first viewing. It's at least the second, possibly the third or more. Moving on to characters. Now, Thomas Kretschmann is perhaps the only really recognizable face outside of Germany, and for a while I would say I preferred him in his native tongue. He's more convincing, but starting in the 2010s, I have liked his American roles as well. We see the veterans are very cynical, and different characters deal with the situation in different ways, crying with humor, pragmatic, and some are traumatized by men dying right next to them. Some are young, some old. At one point they get the food in this like big pot, and before they see what it is, one of them asks, "What have they charred for us today?" And they suggest, we should send this back. Would they themselves eat this? And they get mail from home, and with some very bad news. And some might recall a trip back home or the like. And there are a few Russian civilians caught in the crossfire. At least one woman, at least one child. I'm not going to tell you how many, but yeah, it's worth noting that this is not just two sides of soldiers fighting each other. And any second a civilian is on screen is deeply compelling. And we have a number of 1,000-yard stares, and the Russians and Germans have trouble communicating when they do. Yeah, because the languages are very different, and very few people knew very much of the other language, because basically, I mean, for one thing, they didn't do much to teach it, and for another, if you did know a lot, you might be seen as secretly working for the other side. Moving on to realism. Early on, when they're first going to Stalingrad, they're stuffed in this freight train, and they're eating, sharing food, smoking, drinking. One is shaving as they and literally has like face full of shaving cream as he or I think it was someone else who sticks some food into his mouth. That I would not want to do that. That's you do not want shaving cream in your mouth. I don't know that from personal experience, thankfully, but yeah. There's one point where one of the soldiers exclaims, "I've crapped my pants," and the others barely even react. One of them says, "You're not the only one," indicating someone who hadn't been at the front before. Yeah. And it's really brutal, terrifying, with a lot of different awful fates for the soldiers. It does not have that much and that big battle scenes and explosions and such, but there are a couple of real standout scenes like that. But compared to other big war movies. And what there is chaotic, harsh, often tight on our characters, not too many big wide shots and such. You see a machine gun nest mowing down several soldiers in mere seconds, and sometimes there's a sudden eruption of battle, which is very, very realistic. An entire apartment building collapses from an explosion. And, one of the things with Stalingrad was this, you're fighting building to building. It's urban warfare. You can't see the enemy hiding. They could be in a basement, in an apartment, even an apartment partially blown out, hiding behind a wall that seems too small to be able to hide anyone, and the like. Because when traditionally, back in the old day, war was, you have two armies that walk directly toward each other, and then they start shooting and fighting, and it's just courage. And yeah, in Stalingrad it really wasn't. There was some marching in, but if you tried, you'd very quickly be just decimated because they were really well hidden. The Russians dug in like crazy, and you see, there are battle scenes involving infantry, some involving tanks. And you see this packed field hospital full of people who are, yeah, badly hurt and in pain. In one part, you see rats biting a corpse. And there's one part where you see them burning a whole pile of corpses. It has a really amazing, haunting, unforgettable ending. And you really hope that none of them have like a shell hit nearby and they'll go deaf, because deaf people are illegal. And there's a Hitler speech, which might be real, I'm not entirely certain, where he's basically being really encouraging about Stalingrad, and it's just propaganda. He's talking about how easy it will be and how well it's going, and yeah. Now, some writing reviews that this tries to make you sympathize or makes you sympathize with Nazis, and others point out that others say that they're not, almost none of them are real Nazis, and some say that that's unrealistic. If the characters are Nazis, they don't really express it. And moving on to a few specific reviews I wanted to read some from. Yeah, this movie is about showing war for what it really is, a waste of youth and life. And I'd add, futility, fatalism. What this film portrays better than any war film I've ever seen is the contrast. The film brilliantly begins by showing the men having a great time in Italy. They don't have a care in the world. The beginning is almost too calm and misleading on purpose, that it doesn't prepare you for what is ahead. And I'd add that, in these scenes, they're genuinely funny and the camaraderie is really there. Once they reach Stalingrad, everything changes. This movie in no way attempts to glorify combat. As the movie goes on, the soldiers become more and more hopeless and care less and less about patriotism. And we, just like the soldiers, ask, why continue? What is the point in keeping going? This is probably about the least Hollywood war film ever made, especially with that powerful, depressing ending. In my opinion, one of the best endings to a film ever. Now, another reviewer says, and I'll again just quote, "I was extremely disappointed with this Stalingrad movie. I was led to believe it would depict a good, realistic picture of the battle, e.g. loads of tank and infantry combat, frozen hordes in the trenches, etc. Instead, all we got is a weak storyline centering on just a small group of German combatants, a sort of mediocre Dirty Dozen scenario." I don't think they really had the budget for that kind of movie, but I do understand. I mean, the movie is called Stalingrad, and it really doesn't show the, like the big, the scope of it. We are talking about, I read that 1 million people died there, and yeah, there, if you don't know anything else and you just watch this movie, you don't really, I mean, the movie literally does say a million died, but before that point, you don't necessarily really get the, you don't get that from the movie. It does center on this small group, and if you go into it expecting that, you will be disappointed. And yeah, the movie has some, given that it's set in Stalingrad, it has some points that I haven't really seen in other movies, and yeah, the war scenes aren't bad, but they don't engage the viewer as much as other, war scenes. They don't create the same amount of tension or an idea of what the situation was like for real to the extent found elsewhere. And there's basically no Hollywood going on here, but there are, some really big coincidences, and it is this thing. It kind of has some of the same thing as Fury, where it's not really that realistic that one group of people would experience all these different things, wouldn't be killed somewhere along the way, but in doing so, you get a lot of different situations there. And is either film really saying one group of people experienced all these things, or is it just a way to put into a feature film a lot of different experiences from this? Because at the end of the day, from a feature film, we expect a narrative. We expect that it tells a story, and war, it doesn't necessarily really lend itself to being told in that format. It's millions of people, and some die seconds after they enter combat. Some live for a long time but don't experience very much. Yeah, and yeah, the pacing could definitely use some work. And that is the entire review. So, briefly doing the short review. Stalingrad, the 1993 movie. This follows a small group of German soldiers that are sent to Stalingrad, and basically we see what happens to them over a period of time. And in reality, this is not necessarily what happened to one group of soldiers, but a lot of different experiences, a lot of different fates from the situation are weaved effectively into a single story. And it captures a lot of what made the Battle of Stalingrad especially awful. Please note that this video has spoilers for the subject. Now, the spoiler section. Plot. You have the one soldier who shoots his friend by accident and begs them to shoot him, says he can't live with himself. Very, yeah, that happens. And this, yeah, I'm basically going to be quoting, this is from the Goofs section on IMDb, and I do think this is well worth noting. Factual error. In field hospital, a man is having his leg amputated without anesthetic. Presumably, they ran out of anesthesia. Anyway, I'm not sure that's written correctly, but anyway, the But even so, they would have put a piece of leather between his teeth to bite down upon and prevent him from biting his tongue off. That is very, yeah, they probably ran out of anesthetic, but they would definitely not be trying to cut it off without putting something between his teeth. That's, yeah, they full well knew that he might bite his tongue off if they didn't do that. And you have them finding, I want to say her name was Irina. Yeah, lot of names and not ones I'm necessarily hugely familiar with. Irina the Russian spy. But yeah, they find her bound to, just briefly, they, in general, they find all this stuff in the officers, and it's like, we're starving, and he's got all this stuff here. But yeah, he tied her down to the bed, and I guess they don't say, but it's quite likely he already did rape her. And yeah, there's not even really much of a discussion. It's just, well, okay, she's there. We'll take turns and we'll go by rank. And thankfully, he, the lieutenant, I want to say it's the title, refuses. But the when you're in war, you fear for your own death, and that triggers makes you desperate for sex. With, basically your instincts are telling you, if you die, your line will end. And it's one of the most powerful drives in, the fear of extinction. And, immediately within the line themselves. But yeah, when a person is about to die, they might even think, well, if I die and I don't have children, maybe all of us will die. And yeah, and yeah, she's already tied up, and there are that many of them. It's only one of her, and she's Russian. She already, she tricked the lieutenant earlier. They hate Russians with a passion, so they don't feel as bad about raping her. Now, I am again going to quote someone else from IMDb, I think. Anyway, for the main criticisms of the movie, a love story that wasn't a love story. Those were two people distraught, coming together, trying to find humanity in anyone. The same thing happened with soldiers and the Russian boy. It added a feminine touch, but yeah, and yeah, I don't understand how anyone looks at that and thinks love story, but I don't know, not everybody has studied war as much. And my father was a child when World War II began, and he has been very focused on trying to understand everything about World War II since, as basically all his life. And he told me about a lot of World War II stuff from when I was very young. So yeah, and yeah, and another thing he writes, there was no storyline. Again, people criticizing, saying there was no storyline. Does war have a storyline? I think that is a silly criticism. The storyline is this. They start with 400 men, and the movie narrowed down to show the lives of about 10 men and how each did their part and died. Death is the ultimate end to any story. Just because there was no happy ending doesn't mean it has no storyline. And yeah, I agree. The thing is, there are war movies where it is a specific story. one example would be Saving Private Ryan. There's a very clear story from start to finish, but that's in a lot of ways it's a very personal kind of story. It's just this small group, and that movie also doesn't. I mean, you have you have D-Day, and that's very accurately recreated and such, but overall it doesn't really have like a ton of big, it's difficult to tie a story together with all of these big events and with showing a lot of what happens to people in war. Now, a few notes that I took over the course of it. I like the relationship between Gigi Mueller and I forget his name, but he really tries to help Gigi, and yeah, and once they're in the penal colony, hopefully without penal colonics, the officer shows up with food, and he's clearly in a much better state than they are, and he says you can have this, but you have to ask nicely, really sadistic, really taking advantage of his of their different circumstances, and they're made to execute all these, including Kolya, and they try to to talk him out of it, and say, but he has worked for, he has worked for us. He worked for Ivan too. Now shoot him. And they fake being injured for to get out, and we see this other person. Oh well, clearly he shot himself in the leg. To get out, and he said, no, I have witnesses, and just they won't listen. And they arrive, and just as they get there, they don't get on board the plane, and the plane leaves, and that's very convenient writing, that it would be that exact time. But yeah, and they confront the officer, or rather, and he shoots Gigi, and the line, the boy's name was Kolya, and that one was Mueller, as so many others. And I suppose that covers it.